Have you seen the new reporting from both the New York Post and also from Tucker Carlson?
I have. I saw the New York Post report, and also actually Glenn Beck was talking about Carlson's. I haven't seen Tucker Carlson's show it directly, but I did see Glenn Beck's reporting on it. And I found it, and I watched that whole episode. I found it very interesting, very troubling as well. And it really, some of the information they were sharing was not verified yet. Nonetheless, I think warrants an additional look from Congress. We had taken really our mission on the assassination task force was to leave no stone unturned. And with this new additional information, I think we need to turn over a few more stones and talk to this FBI, because I do think Kash Patel is committed to transparency. When you look and compare him to his previous two predecessors, you have, I think, Comey, in totality, released about 3,000 documents to Congress in his entire tenure. And then Wray, it was 13,000, which was an improvement. But Patel in just a year has been 38,000. So I really do think he's putting his money where his mouth is. But we need additional questions answered.
So this information that's coming out, more of it's now starting to become confirmed, talking about Thomas Crooks' YouTube channel, some of the posts that were made, some of the groups that he was in. You feel as though there are questions that have been left unanswered, and that President Trump's FBI will now hopefully begin to answer some of those questions, some that were left unturned.
Yeah, a couple of things that just smack you in the face are, they told us that he didn't have that big of a footprint on social media. That doesn't seem to be true now. And not to say that it was maybe expansive, but it was certainly more expansive than they led us to believe. That's one. And then two, they were talking about political motivations. They said he didn't seem to have many, but he seemed to have, I think, anti-Semitic and anti-immigration viewpoints. And they didn't tell us about his perhaps fascination with Mao. I think that was interesting in and of itself. And some other things. From our investigation, it seemed that we had obviously a very troubled young man. He was focused on and really obsessed with violence and then violent rhetoric. But we didn't know that part initially. This has just come out now. So that angers me. The fact that I think the assassination task force was stood up at the end of July, I think it was July 29th, we didn't see the rifle that he used until November 18th. That's 4 months. Why? Would it have some secret that China was going to use against it? It was serious. It was silly. The fact that I was asking direct questions to the FBI about what kind of rifle was it? Or scope rather, was it a red dot scope? Was it a magnified scope? They didn't share any of this information with us. So we felt like we were getting stonewalled. And then when we finally went to Quantico, which was in November, it was a long time in coming. So this just kind of fits that pattern of delay, and maybe not share everything.
You used the word anger a few times, and that's obviously how you feel right now. Is that also how maybe some of your colleagues feel as well that served on that task force, saying, okay, this information is coming out now. This was either, I don't want to say it was hidden, but it was not divulged to the task force, and that there is absolutely a search for answers here. Like, that's where the bottom line comes in. We need answers with this information.
That's a great question, because was it deliberate or was it incompetence? It's one of the two. Why we didn't get this full, expansive report and reporting to us. It should have been quicker, and it should have been more, really, again, all-encompassing, and it wasn't.
What questions specifically are you looking to, focus in to get answered? Was it what you just mentioned in terms of, was it deliberate? Was it intentional? Are there other questions that specifically you have now moving forward that you say, these are the ones specifically I want to ask to those in charge?
One of the deputies for former Director Wray, Paul, I believe his name is pronounced Abadi, he was the one that shared with us that, he has these anti-immigrant and anti-Semitic views. Well, why did he feel compelled to tell us that and not the other information? Is that all he had? I just find it very interesting that it would fit into a narrative that a Biden DOJ would want to put out there, because certainly we saw early reports that this guy was MAGA. So why would you want to, if you're a pro-President Donald Trump, why would you want to try and kill President Donald Trump? That in and of itself didn't make sense then, and that was pretty much rejected out of hand initially. But why, if you're going to make that kind of a statement, why just that? Why was it so selective? That's a direct question I want to ask him under oath. Did he have knowledge of this other information? Because if he did, you could make a very good argument that he lied by omission under oath. Because if we're asking about that and you're going to go there, then give us the full view. Because all we're after Hell, I came to Congress. I want the truth. There's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There is only the truth. That's what we want on any topic, and particularly when the President of the United States, former president and the leading candidate to be the next president, almost has his head explode from an assassin's bullet, and that assassin shouldn't have been anywhere near where the president was. He was 150 yards away with a high-powered rifle. I mean, how the hell does this happen in today's day and age? And we know now it was about 10 critical breakdowns of the Secret Service, which we could certainly run down. And if they did one of these 10 correctly, he probably wouldn't have gotten any shots off. And the man lost his life because of this as well. So it was a major catastrophic failure on their part, but also afterwards, we want to learn the truth. And you know why? Because we don't want this repeated. And it was almost repeated 2 weeks later. So this is unacceptable, and it has no partisan color whatsoever. We want Democratic presidents and elected officials to be protected, and same with Republicans. And obviously the Secret Service failed us, but we don't want the FBI to do so as well.
I just want to follow up. Are you planning on calling on the Deputy Director, Paul Abate? Are you planning on calling for him, or have you formally called for him to come back and testify?
I think, I will be formally calling it. I'm going to talk to Chairman Comer, who does a great job with the Oversight Committee. I think that's where this should land, this further investigation and these turning over of rocks. I think the Oversight Committee is the perfect, really, platform in which to do that. And initially, when we even questioned former director, and I'm glad I can say former when I say director, Cheadle, it was very bipartisan, because people were infuriated whether they were Democrats or Republicans, and it was on her watch. And I knew from whistleblowers that rank and file members of the Secret Service didn't like her leadership, and there was low morale because she didn't know what the hell she was doing, and she proved that.
Did this feel politically motivated?
What's that?
The investigation?
The
FBI's investigation,
okay.
the U.S. Secret Service, and also the information that initially came out. I should have clarified, I apologize,
Sorry.
with Thomas Crooks. Did it feel as though there was a political motivation behind any of this?
Well, the fact that this Mr. Abate happened to mention only he gave us a selected, almost edited viewpoint, or a report on Crooks's possible political motivations. That in and of itself is troubling and could have been, it was just a very convenient thing to talk about and not give us, it was a very narrow answer to the question. And I don't even know actually if he was questioned about that specifically, or he just shared it of his own volition. So that, again, is something that we need to say, why did you just say this and not this whole thing? Because if you reported the whole thing, it leads, I think, the viewer to believe he was just kind of a scrambled-brained, really troubled, mentally ill kid that took a life and almost took the president's life. And then really politics wasn't really behind it. But they tried to say, well, if politics was behind it, it was because he was a right-wing nut. And that wasn't the case.
Because the information coming out was actually showing us, I don't want to say quite the opposite, but that there was some type of alleged radicalization actually going on behind the scenes. From my understanding, prior to COVID, was very much more pro-President Trump and the more right-wing. Mm-hmm. And then following COVID, moved more.
At some point, he flip-flopped politically.
There was some type of alleged online radicalization that was at play here, and then at some point flipped. Yeah,
because troubled minds like that, particularly in today's day and age with this social media, are susceptible to radical views, unfortunately. And his parents even told us, or told the FBI, and they shared it with us, that he was, about a month or two prior to the assassination attempt, was in his garage talking to himself, walking around. They were really kind of fearful of what he may do.
Do you have, you're knowledgeable about, with the autopsy report and Representative Higgins going to Butler and then he was cremated?
Yes.
Okay. When you hear that information, and then, I know Tucker Carlson, you haven't seen the clip, but then also the New York Post reporting on this as well, when you're talking about regathering evidence here down the line, and continuing an investigation into Thomas Crooks and the FBI's investigation into Thomas Crooks, and you hear that the body was cremated. I mean, I don't know when you heard that initially, but it's about 10 days afterwards. You need an FBI signature in order to do that with an ongoing investigation. When you hear that, I'm not going to ask you again if you think it was politically motivated, but your thoughts on hearing that 10 days after the assassination attempt, his body was cremated.
That didn't make sense to me when I first found out about it, because this is the body, for lack of a better term, is evidence. I mean, this was a shooter. This is a person that killed someone and tried to kill many, President Trump, and could have killed others. Why was his body cremated so quickly? Why was the crime scene on the roof that he was on, why was that cleaned so quickly? Leave it as it is. And B, you should err on the side of caution in that regard. They did not. That's another question that I would directly like to ask the FBI, or who was ever making those calls on balls and strikes back then.
And it's been reported as well that I believe there was some drone surveillance activity, or at least some restrictions that should have been in place when Thomas Crooks allegedly was flying his drone, looking in and around that area as well. I'm assuming those are questions that you also want to get answered. How is this system, the security system, just so happened to be down for, I think it was at least minutes, if not 10 minutes?
We asked that question back, when we were doing our original investigation, and they had anti-drone technology. It just wasn't working. So my question then is, well, why didn't you have redundancy? That's your whole job. You have a fail-safe mission. You cannot fail. So you have to have built-in redundancies. And the answer was, yeah, we should have had it. Sorry. Okay, why? I have a lot of questions, and I had them then, I still have them, and their answers then were, sorry, we just got it wrong. There was a water tower. It was the highest point. It had line of sight to where the president was actually speaking, and line of sight to the rooftop where Crooks shot from the AGR building. And he shot from that vantage point. Why didn't you have somebody up there? They could have seen it right away. You should have had somebody on the roof. You should have had cameras on the roof. Now, there wasn't anybody on the roof that day because it was 95 degrees and apparently it was really hot. Nobody wanted to get on the roof. Well, I don't care, that's your job. It was the fact that the Secret Service didn't liaison properly with local law enforcement. And local law enforcement, this isn't their purview. This is the expertise lies with the Secret Service. They should have toured and showed them, all right, I want people in the building, I want people on the building. Somebody like me without any security background at all, it made clear sense to me that the AGR complex was 17 acres, 5 of which were somewhat problematic. Why didn't you, because there were no AGR employees that were coming to work that day. It was a Saturday and they were told not to come in. So why not put police tape around the entire perimeter and then have 12 local law enforcement with dogs, a couple of dogs, just patrolling and saying, no human beings can come on this footprint. What a lot of people don't know is there were 150 to 200 people that were in the unsecure area on the AGR property that were closer to the president than the shooter. They just happened not to be bad guys. That's problematic to me. And how many times prior to this has this occurred, where there were vantage points that could have been compromised that just weren't, and the president's life wasn't it was endangered but not taken, simply because there were no bad guys on the scene that day. There's no way in the world that this is the first time they had these kind of breakdowns. Why weren't they flying drones? Why didn't they have redundancy on their anti-drone? Why didn't they have just one command post instead of 2? You don't have 2 command posts. There's a reason. Why, when your snipers are talking to one another, they have to get off their scope and go to their cell phones and text one another? You've got to, but I mean, we've all seen the movies. I mean, Jason Bourne, he's looking through that and he just taps like this, and because the technology exists. The fact that they couldn't communicate with local law enforcement in real time either, because some local law enforcement saw him on the roof and they couldn't relay it. It should have never happened. So there's all these series of breakdowns of that can't ever happen again. And then 2 weeks later, it almost happens again. It's really remarkable.
Have you seen any of the new reporting from both the New York Post and also from Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, we definitely got stonewalled when we finally got answers that we thought were fully forthright, and now it seems like they weren't. So that's an issue that again causes me angst and anger. I would like to bring in the new director of the Secret Service, Sean Curran, and just visit with him as well to make sure that, hey, have these lessons been learned, and hey, has the culture changed? Because Cheadle resigns, and rightfully so, the day after we have her in front of the Oversight Committee, right? And then you got Acting Director Rowe, who didn't learn lessons, I think, at all, because him and I got into it at a task force hearing, the last one we had, because he's sitting there standing behind the President of the United States, Joe Biden, at a 9/11 memorial in New York. And that doesn't seem to the layperson, why is that a big deal? Because he has no business as the director of the Secret Service standing behind the president. You know who's supposed to be standing behind the president? The head of his security detail, the agent in charge of the detail. And why is that important? Because he's the one in charge of the protection plan. he has a vest on. He has a radio in his ear, and he went to the operational briefing that morning. So if anything, God forbid, goes down, they all know, they all have a role to play. Rob Rowe doesn't. What the hell was he there for? Obviously, he was there for the photo op, okay? And furthermore, when he puts the director or the special agent in charge of the president's detail out of position, guess who he then puts out of position? The special agent in charge of the vice president's detail. He was also out of position. So it was chaos. They didn't want him there. He didn't attend the briefing. You know who told me all this? Secret Service whistleblowers. They were infuriated that he was there. He was auditioning for that job to have it full time. And he put the president's life in danger when he did that because he wasn't wearing a vest. That's important because God forbid, again, there's a shooter, and if they hit him, the bullet doesn't go through him. It would have went right through Rob Rowe and killed Joe Biden. He didn't go to the operational briefing that morning. He had no operational reason to be where he was. He didn't have a radio on him, et cetera. So he would have been in the way if something had gone down. Now, he chose to not answer these series of questions that he knew was coming once I showed him the picture. And he started screaming at me about the sanctity of 9/11 memorials. I'm perfectly fine with you going to the memorial, sir, but not disrupting the protection plan of the president and vice president of the United States.
FBI Director Kash Patel and also Dan Bongino, I know I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but
Sure.
I am curious. They both said this was included in Tucker Carlson's piece, and I believe it was also reported in the New York Post, but we've heard them say that they're going to release information, or they want to release information after the trial. They keep saying the trial. Do you have any idea what the trial is referring to or what they're referring to?
I don't know.
Because they keep saying, we're going to release after a specific trial. Said in the past they would release information after the trial, and I think a lot of people have been asking, Tucker Carlson included, what trial are they referring to?
Yeah, well, that's me. I'm going to ask that question too. I don't know.
Okay, just because we've been watching this and we were a little, I think we were as confused as some others.
Yeah.
And then it was repeated as we were watching.
Well, I can ask Chairman Kelly too, the task force chairman, and say, do you know what trial they're referring to? Because I don't.
Yeah, we would love to be able to figure this out.
We'll get to you on that, yeah.
Perfect, yeah, because they keep saying the trial. We don't know if anybody's referring to an investigation that's ongoing that we don't know about. But the word trial, of course, in our minds say, okay, well, what trial is actually transpiring?
Right. Well.
Okay, but we'll follow up and we'll ask Chairman Kelly about that. Anything else? I just want to open things up here.
Sure.
About, Thomas Crooks, anything that I didn't ask, the investigation, where things go from here with the task force in light of this new information that is starting to come out and that more of this information is getting confirmed.
Really just that what struck me was, again, sometimes from a layman's perspective, you can get a new vantage point, right? And you can see things more clearly than somebody that's maybe too close to it. You can be more objective. And so one of the things that struck me was this troubled 19, 20-year-old kid outsmarted the United States Secret Service. That's really problematic in and of itself. And how he did it that day. Flew the drone around, went to the site, I think around 3:30, to make sure that nobody was on the roof. There's a photo of him somebody took, and he's looking at the roof to make sure that, because if somebody was on it, he might not have come back. And he was then smart enough, although obviously mentally ill, but smart enough to not have the rifle on him at the time. And then when it looked like the coast was clear, and he used a rangefinder, and they saw him with the rangefinder, and they didn't nab him, then they lost sight of him. Like, that's just, it's odd. But then he goes back to the car, gets his weapon, brings it back in a backpack, then assembles it, climbs the roof, and gets on. I mean, it was amateur hour, but he did it. He pulled it off.
And the task force is going to ask specifically, why were we kind of told there wasn't a digital footprint, but now all of a sudden this reporting is showing us and proving that there was an extensive digital footprint that was not revealed to us.
Yeah, if you do your job the right way and thoroughly initially, you get a lot fewer conspiracy theories moving forward, and that's really good for the country. People just want transparency and they want the truth. Look at what happened with, in November of 1963 with Kennedy shooting. There was the Warren report that was rushed and was botched. And then how many books have been written about conspiracy theories? And I think still to this day, a majority of Americans don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Some of that is in part just how can this insignificant, troubled young man be an historic figure and take out the President of the United States? But you've got to know, was he acting alone or not? We to this day don't know, or at least we're unsure as a country. We don't want this to happen ever again. We don't want the act to happen ever again, but we don't want that doubt to creep into the American really persona either, because if you start doubting things like that, you're not going to trust your own government. And that's not a healthy place to be in an open republic.